Grit, determination, resilience. These are the qualities of a successful rugby player and a successful lawyer and law student. It's not easy to be a competitive rugby player, and it's certainly not easy to be a great lawyer. But grit, determination, and resilience are taught through experience, both on the rugby pitch and in the law classroom. So, what about mastering grit, determination, and resilience in both rugby and law simultaneously? Hi, Amos Vang here. And on this episode of the Law School Show, I am pleased to welcome Catrina Thompson, former rugby player for the Carleton University Ravens and the University of Calgary Dinos, and currently an articling student at MLT Eikens LLP. Catrina played scrum half for both the Ravens and the Dinos, and during her career, she played against some of the best women's rugby teams in U Sports, including the University of Ottawa GGs. Balancing both law school and rugby, Catrina competed at the U Sports Women's Rugby National Championships in Ottawa in 2019. In 2022, Catrina completed a Juris Doctor at the University of Calgary's Faculty of Law. Whether it's intense workouts at the squat rack or at the bench press, or whether it's stressful study sessions for a fact pattern exam, Catrina has seen it all. Catrina, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
So let's go back to the very beginning. Isn't that long ago? Ain't that long ago, actually. Before I get into that, I should probably, tell our audience that actually Catrina has been a very long time friend of mine. So, it's kind of strange for me to kind of make this look like we don't know each other when we actually do know each other very well. So going a few years back, or however long it was, what inspired you to go to law school?
Yeah, so I kind of was one of those people from the very beginning who was told, you should be a lawyer, because I love to conflict resolve, and I love to debate, and just really wanted to understand why things were the way they were, and really wanted everything to be just and fair in society. And so I got interested in it in high school, took my first law class, and just fell in love. And then I went to Carleton because I had a law program, and just continued to fuel that passion and build it and learn more about social justice issues that I'm passionate about. And all of it just really kept me on that path to what I wanted to do since high school, and that was to go to law school and to obtain my Juris Doctorate and now work in a law firm.
Yeah. Honestly, that's actually quite similar to how I came to what inspired me to go to law school, along with, having the diverse skill set that they teach you in law school through the classes and through experience. Yeah, for me, originally, and I think I told you this like years ago, but I actually got accepted into Carleton's journalism program.
Mm-hmm.
But then I realized, wait, there's a law program at Carleton. So, you know what? I'm just going to switch over before I step into a journalism classroom and just go into law instead. And it worked out. So, but yeah, I had people in my family and some of my friends tell me that, yeah, it would be great to, go into law school and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always the people around you know better than you. They're like, your personality.
Yeah.
Go into law.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I think there's also a certain personality, I guess, for so some people can kind of see it. And, once they say it, they're more often than not correct in a way, in a good way, that is. So, I mean, it worked out for both of us. So that's the important part. But what's more interesting, I think, at least from my personal perspective rather, is your career actually in rugby. So what inspired you to pursue rugby?
I grew up playing sports. I started playing hockey when I was 3 and played hockey my whole life, and was like, I'm going to go play hockey at Carleton. And then in grade 10, I a couple of my hockey friends were playing rugby and I'd seen it, and I was kind of like, oh, what's this sport? And I just went out to a practice actually with a different school because my high school didn't have a team. So I just like showed up at a different high school's practice. I was like, can I try this out? And they were like, I guess, sure, why not? And they let us start training. I went with one of my other friends, and they let us train, and eventually they petitioned to the school district to be able to allow us to play with them and in the league because our school didn't have a team and there wasn't enough interest in my school to have a team. And that's kind of when I fell in love with the sport. I had played hockey my whole life, loved hockey, thought it was like the only sport for me, and then started rugby and was like, oh my God, this sport is terrifying. It is terrifying, but it is so fun and it is so complex and challenging. And it just like, the more I learned about rugby, the more confused I got about rugby. Like, it was just such a fun puzzle that I felt like I could almost crack the code, almost solve, but like never fully get there. So I feel like it just was something that challenged me every single time I showed up to practice or a game. And I just loved being challenged and not being able to master anything. It was like always being bad at it a little bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I'm glad you mentioned, when your first impressions about rugby. That was actually one of my questions I wanted to ask you about because, yeah, it seemed like, like you mentioned, it seems like it was such a terrifying sport. And for a lot of people who have watched it for the first time, they would feel quite terrified about it because it's basically like, I mean, this, for a lot of them, at least, their first impression is it's American football without any of the protective equipment. So I was like, oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, it definitely has like a bad rep on first glance because it is so fast. It is so confusing. You have to pass the ball backwards, which I think is like the biggest, like, what? Like, you're tackling and you're passing the ball backwards. How are you moving forwards? Like, what is this? And so it definitely gets like a weird reputation when people look at it. Or when I tell people I play rugby, they're like, oh, isn't that dangerous? And I'm like, no, it's not dangerous. It's, as risky as any sport you're playing. Like, all injuries are possible. All injuries are on the table. But, you're taught how to do it properly. Just like hitting in hockey, like, you're taught how to do it properly and safely so you don't get hurt.
Yeah, and similar with martial arts as well. Although part of that is about knocking the guy down. But like, even when you're training, it's still like, whether if it's karate or MMA or kickboxing or that sort of thing. When you're sparring, you're not exactly, you're not in a cage fight. You're not in an actual competition fight. Yeah, and even then there are rules, right? There's no low hits. You can't hit certain areas, so on and so forth. And there are certain things you can and can't do. But yeah, when you're training, there's like, they teach you how to do it, how to train properly. Which is why you see a lot of the masters, like they know when to show full force and also when to stop right before they hit somebody. Like, it's so precise when they hit. So I mean, to me, it seems like there's a lot of similarities between martial arts and rugby in that situation. And I think you mentioned back when we were both studying at Carleton, you actually did take some kickboxing classes like back in the day, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
so.
I used to, not kickboxing. Kind of wish it was kickboxing. It was just boxing, and I like learned to spar. Never actually wanted to do it for real, but I did in my off season. I would do some boxing because I found it just to be such a great cross training for rugby. The fitness was like so high, and rugby fitness is high, but something about boxing, you don't get a break. So it's like just you constantly going. So I think that helped me so much be able to be in shape for rugby and kind of toughened me up a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And like, you probably already know this, but like in a match, whether it's a competitive match or even just protecting yourself if you run into a horrible situation in the streets, first of all, you don't want to get into a fight on the streets. But like, a minute is forever, like forever in a match. That's why when I see these rounds, I mean, a lot of people who don't know about the sport don't realize that 2 minutes per round, especially if it's boxing, or I forgot how many minutes it is for a UFC match, whatever. It's like 2 minutes or 2 minutes and a half. It takes forever, right? It's like incredible endurance.
Oh my gosh. It does remind me, like, seeing stuff like that and just knowing how tough people who participate in those sports are. Like, in rugby, when we're doing our physical trainings, a lot of the time our coaches will say like 5 seconds. Like, you're going to go into this battle and I need you to battle hard for 5 seconds. And in practice, it feels like an hour. They're like, that 5 seconds is the thing that is going to take you down. Like, you are dying, your body's on fire. And it's like, that was 5 seconds. Like, all I did was work hard for 5 seconds and I'm exhausted. So it is very funny how slow time moves when you're in situations like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I mean, myself, I used to do karate back in the old days, Shotokan and Chito Ryu karate, like for 3 years and stuff, and I stopped because there wasn't enough sparring
Hmm.
experience. But man, it's one thing like in karate we learn a lot about katas, right? So like katas is basically like a string of movements that you kind of practice to learn. There's a lot of Japanese tradition behind it, but there's also a lot of memory of trying to know the movements, like a punch, high block,
Hmm.
low block, side kick, front kick, roundhouse kick, so on and so forth, and elbows and all that stuff. But when you're actually protecting yourself or you're in a situation, you don't actually go into those formal stances. Like you're kind of just adapting as you're moving. You're not going to go
Yep.
into like a horse stance or a front stance or whatever. You're actually you're moving around. You're trying to make sure you're not an open standing target. So it's just so different. Like, but the fitness, yeah, like the fitness is you got to have good cardio. You also have to have good strength, but you can't be
Hmm.
too bulky because you
Yeah.
slow down, right? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a lot of fun back in the day when I did it, but I stopped and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, going back to rugby, take us back to your first few rugby games. I believe you were playing for Burnaby Lake at the time, or probably a different team. I'm not too sure. But take us back to that first set of rugby games. What was it like when you first stepped onto that field for the first time?
Oh my gosh, so embarrassing to think about that because I was back in high school actually. So I was playing for Carson Graham high school rugby team. And I remember the coaches because I was always scared he would is rolling subs and I did not start because we had girls from grade 12 all the way down to grade 8, I think, at the beginning, the first few games. So I was in grade 10. I was not tall, not big. I wasn't small or anything. I wasn't big or small. I was kind of just in the middle. But I remember hearing him call my name and I was so scared. So I was like, oh my God, I have to go on the field now. And I'd watched what had happened on the field. And in high school rugby, it is the messiest thing you've ever seen.
Oh
There is
no.
nothing messier than high school rugby. Maybe junior rugby is messier, but they're not tackling yet. This is like full messy. No one knows how to pass. Everything is just a mess. And I stepped onto the field absolutely terrified. And I think I just threw the ball away. The first time it came into my hands, I think I just like threw it away. I was like, I don't want to get tackled. I don't want I don't think I made a single tackle. I don't think I did like a single thing I was supposed to. I was a train wreck the first time I stepped on the field. And I think I vowed after that to myself. I was like, okay, I don't know how to play. I really need to like do better, work hard, put in those hours of training and actually try and understand, which was a different feeling that I had felt in sports because most sports I had done, soccer, hockey, those things I understood before I played because my siblings played and I grew up watching my siblings play as well. Whereas rugby, I'd never seen a game before. And so it was a cool challenge to go and be like, wow, I am the worst I will ever be today. And I am going to make sure I'm never this bad again. So that was like the first one. And then I think it improved the improvement rate with rugby is quite fast, almost like snowboarding, where it's like you're so bad, and then suddenly it just like clicks and you get it more so. You don't throw the ball away. You learn you can just like run. If you don't know how to pass, you can just run. And so it just started to click after that. And then it got a lot less nerve wracking because I understood the things I could do well. It's like I can run, I'm fit enough, and I'm not much smaller than anyone else here. So I'm not going to get crushed or thrown around. And I started to have more confidence in myself in that in that area.
Yeah, I think that those early challenges that you faced at that time, I think it's also transferable in the law as well. Because especially in law school, I think everyone who's listening to this or watching this is going to relate to this. Those first few months are the roughest things you've ever done in your life academically.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It's I still get Vietnam War flashbacks to my first month. Like like so many sleepless nights, in my when I was law school wasn't that long ago for me. It was like 4 years ago, as of this recording date. But I mean, oh my oh my goodness, like, and at the time I also had to prepare for an in-school moot as well.
Oh
So
gosh.
balancing that and finding your groove in the law school sense, not to mention worrying about the curve, the bell curve for marks and stuff like that. And also like first year recruit. which takes up, by the way, takes up way too much space in the in people's minds. Everyone's like, oh, you gotta get your 1L recruit or 2L recruit and all that kind of stuff. Man, the stress is just insane. But like after the first year, all of a sudden, your second year, you realize I have all this extra time, and it feels like, wait a minute.
I mean, the extra time, I didn't feel that as much, but that's because I had a very busy schedule doing both. But I do remember it being very similar. Like the first few days, even starting work, it's kind of you get a challenge and you realize I'm so bad at this. Like I have to put in this work, and you get so stressed and anxious. But it's definitely something that I think I've benefited from having those like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing moments in sports. And then going into school, I have those, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing moments. But I remember, I'm like, okay, like you can do this. You know how to do this. You know how to get through this. You can practice, you can study, you can, ask for help. You can work with your peers. You can build a team, all these different things. So definitely feel like those moments in sports at a young age helped me from being that traumatized student on the first day of law school.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think a lot of athletes from other sports who went into law school feel the same way as well. And some of them came from professional sports even. There's this one guy who did the civil law program at Ottawa U, and he played AHL hockey, I think, from what I remembered. And like that transition was a lot easier for him, and also for a lot of the people in common law who I knew a couple of people who used to play for the women's hockey team for the GGs, and then went into law school. And yeah, like that adjustment was still difficult for them, but they realized that they had to rely on a lot of support. And that's one of the things that especially for team sports, it's that support and that team behind you. And you learn a lot of that from your old days, whether from you started playing team sports when you were younger, or if you're playing it even just recently and stuff. And I think that's like a massive, massive advantage that a lot of athletes have that most people who don't play sports don't have, or those who played solo sports don't necessarily have, or not as much. So that was a massive advantage, I think, for them. And I think it was for you as well when you started out.
Oh, definitely. I feel like it was a huge thing to have. And having it while I was in law school as well, it wasn't as much of a shell shock. I definitely think it would have been different had I gone into first year and not had already been in training camp like the month before, already been at school, already explored the campus, already done all of that, and kind of situated myself in the city I was going to school in. So that definitely helped. And even on the first day, I got to show up in my my Dinos backpack, and it made me feel like some sense of belonging and some sense of community there. And I think that's just something that can't be bought. Like it is such a huge help. And I'm so lucky to have had that opportunity, because having that just took away so much anxiety and so much fear and worry. And so it was just very, very nice. And I felt very lucky to have that going into the first year.
That's great. And I mean, in your first year at Carleton, I mean, that would have been a massive, major life change for you at the time.
Oh my gosh, yeah. That's even better one to think of too, because like I moved out there and it was the first time I was away from home. I was across the country, and first experience was like getting picked up at the airport by some girls on the team. And they just let us stay at their house during training camp. And you had to like hope that you made the team too, or else it would have been awkward. Like you're staying at this house instead of like you're cut from tryouts and you're not going with them anymore. And then it transitioned to being on res. But I had already had, that experience where I was staying with these people who showed me like, where do you grocery shop? And like, how do you take transportation? How do you get around Ottawa? And then I had these built-in friends too. And they were built-in mentors even. And it's very similar to kind of the mentors you get through law school. But it was just having these people who have been through it, who are kind of aware of the challenges you're probably going through on day one, as like scared deer in headlights. And so having that on the first day there was so, so helpful. And then the first actual day moving into res, like again, I had already explored the campus. I had already seen the res building I was going to be in. I had already met people at school. So I didn't feel that pressure to kind of find your community right away, which I think is a very tough situation to be in, especially on the first day on res when like everyone's moving in and it's so crazy and scary. So definitely great.
Oh man. Yeah. I think you lived in Prescott, because I think a lot of the athletes lived in Prescott, or
I was not with any other athletes. I was in Dundas in like the fishbowl.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, I lived in Lenox.
Okay.
Um, yeah, the newest building, the one with the paper thin walls. But I mean,
Yeah.
like to me, I always found like one of the best ones because not only because it was newer, but because you know, like, I had a single room from year two, year three, and year four.
Mhm.
And oh man, but year one I had to share a room with a roommate at the time. And oh man, like I mean, especially when like frost week when it's all this like oh my goodness, like I just stayed home. I didn't go to like the vast majority of the events because I'm not really a party guy.
Yeah.
Um, I'm more of an introvert myself, so like going out and partying until 2 a.m. like that's not my kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's fair. No, I
Yeah.
remember that too. We had a dry season that year that was like implemented. So Frost Week was not something I was participating in. Our training sessions were at 6:30 in the morning every morning. So I had the reverse schedule of my roommate. I also shared in like a tiny, tiny room. And she would go out and party and be up until like 3 a.m. and I'd be waking up a few hours later to go to rugby and be up all
Oh
day and she would
no.
sleep while I was gone and it was really funny. We barely got to spend any time together because we were always sleeping at opposite times.
That's insane.
But it
That
was
is
fun. She was
insane.
like I got lucky because she was really respectful and she was quiet enough. Like she wouldn't bring people into the room when I was sleeping. She was really sweet in that regard. So I feel like as an athlete too, you could get really unlucky
Yeah.
and have the opposite where your roommate does not care about your schedule. And yeah, she was a really deep sleeper as well. So I didn't wake her up when I had to like clamber out at 6 in the morning to walk to the field.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I know I feel that too. And when I in my first year, I lived on a so-called quiet floor, but it was not a quiet floor. It was not a quiet floor. And um I mean, the good news was at least for Frost Week, like after Frost Week was over, things kind of slowed down. But there were still like nights in that first year where, and a lot, I found a lot of issues with a lot of the kids back then. Because I mean, to be frank, I mean, when you're an 18-year-old, you're still a kid, right? So a lot of them they didn't know what to do with so much free time, right?
Yeah.
Because with when you're in high school, every single part of your day is structured out, like from 9 to 3 or however long your school day was. You got this class at this time, lunch period at this time, this class at this time, da, 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 da. And if you're an athlete at the time, you've got after school practice or even before school practice. But now, when you're in university, all of a sudden you're not in class every single day, depending on
Mhm.
your program, of course. I mean, for engineering students, you're in class pretty much every day. But for us, we were busy. But if and you remember the law program, like there were days where we wouldn't even have classes for that entire day if we planned it out well
Yeah.
and registered well. And all of a sudden, a lot of the students they're like I don't know what to do with this time. And
Yeah.
Frost Week gave them that wrong impression of, oh, it's actually just parties and university. It's like, no, it's not. It's studying. You got to
Yeah.
pay. Not only are you paying for tuition, even if you're not paying for your tuition, the whole point of university is to study and to do well in school, and hopefully get a good paying job outside of that, or apply for an academic program afterwards. But a lot of kids don't know about that, or don't realize that, and they had the wrong idea. So they just waste their time, and I mean, like, and their health just dips too.
Oh yeah.
Like,
No, definitely. And that's something that's so nice about having sports. Like if you can play sports, if you have played sports all your life, like keep up at sports because regardless of if it's varsity or not, just having something to remind you that like everything is separate. You have school, you have your sports, but like life is not just a party. It is like party when you can, but also remember you have to study and then remember you need to like keep yourself healthy and have these activities that are good for you and good for your body and good for your mind. And so definitely like thankful too to have that because like you said, not having a schedule, I think I would have gone crazy. I wanted to have a very rigid schedule. Like I loved that. I thrive under that. Like you have to be here at this time and you have to be here at this time and you had to just like plan everything out. And my study time would always be like, you have 2 hours, like 3 to 5. That's when you can study. You have to study. If you don't study here, you don't get to study today. So it would be very difficult without that.
exactly. And this is also an important piece of advice for those in our audience who are not anywhere close to law school, but are thinking about going to law school. One of the things that you will notice in law school, if you choose to go to law school, is that you have to be very structured on how you do things. I mean, don't get me wrong, different people have different study patterns, but they all have some kind of a pattern or schedule when they're doing things in law school, because not only are you balancing time to go to class, you're also balancing time to study. On top of that, you're also balancing time to keep yourself healthy, physically and mentally as well. For me, I started doing this more of like a 2017 resolution, New Year's resolution. I started actually lifting weights like seriously. Well, not like competitively seriously, but like very often. And since university, I kept it up all the way till now. Like since that, I made that New Year's resolution to myself. I've been keeping that for getting close to 6 years now. Like, I mean,
Wow.
5.5 years. So, and I feel very, very different. I used to hit the gym like 6 days a week, 6 days a week, like 3 days of upper body, 3 days of legs, just trying to make sure that I don't look, out of proportion, disproportionate and stuff like that. Right. And now, after I graduated law school, I toned it down to 5 days a week now, but I still maintain that kind of schedule. Like every time I come back from work, I always make, about an hour or an hour and a half of my time to exercise and stuff, and to lift weights and get my workouts in. And it feels, you feel very different after that, even now. That's what I found. My energy levels are a lot more. I don't have to rely. I never drank coffee before, and I still have never drank coffee. And even after exercising, I even less have to worry about coffee, because you get enough sleep, exercise, you drink enough water, and you eat right. You have enough energy to last the day. And at least that's from what I was able to find from my own schedule. So
Yeah, no, definitely. Like if you have that rhythm or some kind of thing that works for you, that's what sports helped me find. But it's something that like I advise all of my friends or colleagues or people I'm mentoring. I always say just try and figure out what works for you and what level of activity you want, and what your time looks like in a day, and just don't overschedule yourself if it's not going to work, but just finding little things, little goals to set. Like, I want to go for 3 walks this week, 3 10-minute walks. It's not a big deal. 3 10-minute study break walks, something like that, to kind of help balance yourself. And the more you do it, like you said, like the more you do it, it becomes this pattern, and it just becomes ingrained in you, and it doesn't feel like a chore anymore. It's just like, oh yeah, it's something I have to do. Like I'm going to go to the gym now after work, and it's something you get excited for. You're like, wow, I finished work and I get to go to the gym now. It's going to feel so good. And then after the gym, I'm going to feel amazing. And then it just like helps top off your day and help you kind of recycle all of that stuff that's happened, and just wake up and fresh and anew and ready for a new day.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And for you, I mean, on top of keeping yourself healthy, you also have to keep yourself competitive as well in rugby, especially during the Carleton days. You were playing in the RSEQ. As you know, it is, oh man, like it's so competitive. Like you're facing top level teams, especially the U Ottawa GGs, which boasts some world class players there. How did you prepare for these teams? Like these were incredible challenges that you had to face. How did you prepare for them?
It was definitely like always our big game when we would play the GGs, because the team was still growing. The program itself was still developing. I think now they're doing amazing. I've been following their progress, and they've been just doing phenomenal. It's been really fun to watch. But because they're in that league, that is just such an insanely hard league, we would do everything we could to train for the games and just mentally prepare and go into the games not fearing what was going to happen, but just really focus on little moments in the games from start. Just focus on like, your next 5 minutes, and just keep doing that, and not focusing on the score, and learning how to drop the bad things that happen, because we knew going into it like this was going to be hard, and we didn't care if we won. Obviously that's always the goal, like you always want to win, but our biggest goal was always to go out and do better than we did the game before. So and being on the team for 4 years, it would be better than the year before. So if the score the year before was this, like I personally and the girls in my year and the years above always wanted to do better than what we had done that year. And I think we managed that, if I'm looking back correctly. I think from my second year, I don't count that one because I was not playing that year. I was unfortunately out that season with an illness. But in my first year, I think we had a pretty bad loss around like 50-0. And then my third year, I think we narrowed that down to like 30-0. And then in my last year, it was the last game I played with the Ravens, actually, that we played the GGs. And I think we were only down by like 5 at the end of the first half, which was insane, like absolutely insane. And we were so proud of ourselves. And I think we lost that game like 20-0. I could be so wrong on the scores because it's been so long, but like that's what it felt like. And I just remember that last year, like that was our goal, was to put everything on the field that first half and just like do our very best to not let them score on us, to just play our game and to just like hold them off, hold them off, hold them off. And we did. And it was so cool to have that be the last game. And that was the last time I got to wear the Ravens jersey. And it was just a really good way to end because we knew that team was so strong. I mean, they were coached by an amazing coach and they just had amazing players as well. I think a lot of them have gone on to play, you know, on like Team Ontario, Team Quebec, and some of them on Team Canada, which is an amazing accomplishment. And it's cool to see them now and be like, wow, I got to play against those players. And actually playing with someone who played on the GGs while I was there on my club team now, which is really funny. I showed up wearing my Raven shirt and she showed up wearing her GG shirt. And I'm like, oh my God. It was like the Spider-Man meme. We're like, it's really fun. So that's another great thing about rugby, though. You have those rivals or the like rivals when it comes to on the field, but off the field, you have such a deep respect for the people you play against and the skills that they bring to the field. Even so that years down the line, you could see each other just wearing that shirt and you have that instant connection to be like, wow, you played in that league. Like you played RCQ. That's amazing. And to know that you played against someone too, be like, oh my God, I remember like when you tackled me like this. I remember when you like turned over the ball on me and all this stuff. And it's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun for me to start announcing rugby too. That's actually how we actually met in Carleton because it was my first season announcing really anything. At the time, I was a PA announcer, stadium announcer for soccer, mainly for soccer, and also mainly for rugby. And I filled in for basketball and hockey on the odd occasion and whatnot. And yeah, no, it was a lot of fun because for me, I had never watched a full game of rugby before. Like that never happened for me. So for me, to have watched that, it was a massive learning curve for me as well. And I actually, the year that you played in your first year, I think I remember you guys lost. I mean, we lost it to the GGs like 93-0 or something like that first game.
Yeah. I think that was my second year. And that was the year I didn't play. I remember that game. It was like 100-0.
Oh.
Yeah, it was like over
I think it was second year. Yeah.
I was on the sideline and just so I was like, oh my God. It's not our best year. It was that was a transition year.
Oh yeah. No, I remember that. But it was a lot of fun, and myself trying to get the terminology down because and especially since it was my first season ever doing it, I was nervous as nervous can be. But I was very grateful to have had the chance to announce a rugby at the time and transition. As like I ended up doing more sports and doing different things and all that stuff. But oh man, I also need to make this disclaimer though, because especially since a lot of our podcasters on the Law School show are from the Ottawa U, and I've also announced for the GGs as well. I gotta say, I'm still a GG, but I'm also a Raven, so I have dual citizenship here.
Very fair, very fair. It's definitely like I feel like when you learn rugby and you're playing it, it becomes easier. But watching rugby is so difficult, and to announce rugby, I couldn't imagine. I don't even think I could announce rugby knowing the game, just because it moves so fast and there's so many different things you have to catch and say. Yeah, it's definitely impressive, and we appreciated having announcers because a lot of the female sports, especially rugby, didn't get as much recognition and as much just as many things. We didn't have tickets for our games. We didn't have announcers sometimes, and it was just always really nice when we did. It made us feel really special and really connected to the school when they put that extra effort into our program.
Yeah, and I'm honestly I'm very grateful to have had I know I said it before, but I got to say it again. I'm very, very grateful to have had the opportunity to do that because a guy like me who never announced a sport before university, now all of a sudden announcing that level of sport, I was really nervous, like genuinely nervous, like to the extent where my heart was just pounding out of my chest each and every time. Like I back in high school, I only did PA announcements, which is a whole different thing from I did PA announcements, but like it was just announcing the day's activities, and it was like for what, 10 minutes. But
Hmm.
now I'm announcing for like 2 hours, and on top of that, like it's for spectators, and like if spectators don't like it, they can you know
Yeah.
roast you.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's funny. I actually have a funny full circle moment that I had at the Nationals in Ottawa in 2019. When I was playing for the Dinos, the team we went up against was the GGs, and that was our first game at Nationals. I was like, oh my God, this is bizarre that we're playing the GGs. Like, what are the odds we would go in the standings? And that was the team we were playing out of like all the 8 teams. We ended up against the GGs. I was just like, of
Yeah,
course.
of course, yeah. And
Yeah.
there's something unique about the Ravens and Gigi's rivalry as well
Oh yeah.
that I don't see anywhere in Canada. I just
Yeah.
don't see it. Like, it doesn't matter what sport it is. Of course, the big ones are basketball and football, but anywhere, like I mean, even like if you're not even playing the sport, even if you're just like the staff. Like I was
Yeah.
just telling when I was still in law school and still announcing for the GGs, I ran into one of the players from the women's volleyball team, and I announced volleyball for them as well. And I was telling her like I used to announce for the Ravens. She's like, oh, so you announced for the Ravens? Hmm.
Oh my
Oh man,
God.
it's like yeah, I came from the quote unquote dark side or the light side or wherever. I got dual citizenship right now, so it's just like I'm kind of on both sides of the equation right now, so I'm getting roasted by both sides and you know and stuff. But yeah, the rivalry, like especially Capital Hoops, um, when I announced that one on TSN 2 years ago, the energy is just so different. And
Oh
both teams, they play like out of their minds.
yeah.
It's insane. Like whether it's men's basketball or women's basketball, like there's just something. Like they play well in general. Like don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, they play like we play well in general, but when we're facing each other, I mean, I'm going to use a Dragon Ball term, and this will be great for a lot of our Dragon Ball fans. It's like Goku versus Vegeta. It's like it's like the best of the best. They face each other, and they know each other so well. They know
Yeah.
their play style so well, and and once they play, it's like magic. It's like
Yeah.
magic.
Oh, it's very fun. It was always a fun time to play in those games. Like it was always different and the spectators are crazy and you just have like this atmosphere and you're gonna represent your school and it's just different. It was always different playing them.
Yeah, yeah. And going back to those days, whether you were playing for the Ravens or for the Dinos, like take us through a typical day, a training day and a typical game day. Like what do you prepare or get through in those days?
So with Ravens, it was a bit different than with Dinos. Because it was the RSCQ, most of the games, not most, but I guess half of the games were away games. And so they would be kind of a far drive. And you were getting in the bus early in the morning to go to like Montreal, something like that. So very mental or like prep oriented, lots of like being focused and getting yourself mentally ready, understanding what you need for the bus ride, getting up, making sure you eat breakfast that day or eat whatever you need and know that you're going to kind of be on from 8 a.m. until 3 p.m. when the game ends. And so it was a lot of that. And then just hoping you got to the field on time to get a really good warm up in. Sometimes you'd be late, and those days were a lot more tricky. But typically, I'd say we'd wake up early. Like Carleton, the bus would be like outside athletics, go to the Timmies every time, and go get like whatever from the Timmies, and the coach would like look at what you got and just like check to see if you were eating something that was appropriate pre-game. And then you'd get on the bus, and there were snacks on the bus, so you'd be sitting there. I would kind of just be listening to music. I think everyone braids hair because that's the time you have to like get ready for rugby. And it's not like other sports, you can just like toss your hair up. You got to have some kind of hairstyle that is going to survive the game. And so it'd be a lot of that and just kind of, your mental preparation, your visualizations, that would all be going on. And then you'd arrive at the field around, if our game was at 1, we'd get there about an hour and a half beforehand. And then you would go to the change room, start getting your stuff on, still listening to music on your own. Or if you're someone who gets hyped with other people, you'd be just kind of like getting ready with the music. I always played like wall ball with a couple of my teammates. We would just go outside with like bouncy balls and just like chuck the ball at the wall and like just play that beforehand. That always got me really hyped and ready to go. And then team warm up would start about an hour before the game. You're running through with just your positions, and then you run through all together, and then kickoff happens and play your heart out. Game ends, go back to the change room. Sometimes you'd shower, sometimes you wouldn't have time, or like there just won't be facilities for it. And then you hop back on the bus, get some food, and then go back home and get ready to train the next week.
That is busy. That is busy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, man. Oh man. From morning all the way till evening.
Yeah.
Oh man. Like that is actually intense. And yeah. I mean, it just goes to show like the discipline that you have to have when you're playing not just rugby, but really any sport, but in your case, rugby. You have that kind of discipline. And you mentioned that point about your coach checking what you got at Timmy's. Yeah. I think I remember your team, the rugby team in particular, had like a dietitian that was devoted to just looking at the food and what you're getting, the kind of calories you were eating, and like the good calories, bad calories, so on and so forth. Like that was in there too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we had a dietitian there, and he would help you kind of learn what you needed for your body, which was super helpful. But as much as the dietitian was there to help you, it still was completely on you to try and figure out how to meal prep and balance all of that on top of it, which was in undergrad compared to law school, something that I struggled with. Like I did not know how to keep myself healthy and fed and be eating enough. So you definitely notice if you weren't being good at your nutrition, like if you weren't following your nutritional plans, things like that, like you would notice in the gym, none of your lifts would be going up, like none of your weights would be increasing, and you'd be getting faster, but you wouldn't be getting stronger. Like I noticed when I was in like middle of the season, I was losing like a ton of weight and being super quick, but I was like, this isn't helpful for what I actually need to be doing in my position. Like I need to be quick, but I also need to be quite strong. And so it was nice to have a nutritionist, but it still fell on our backs to cook for ourselves and find that time, which when you're in school is so difficult to find time. And also funds, like you have to be able to afford your own food, and eating healthy is very expensive.
Oh yeah. It is quite expensive. And another thing that I also realized, like for me, it was actually quite easier to eat healthy. Like I mean, from my standpoint, but I mean, I'm not trying to compare because I was never an athlete. Well, I kind of was for like a year in grade 8 for volleyball, but we don't count that because that's not anywhere close to women's rugby at your level, not anywhere close. But like for me, because I'm Asian, I'm Chinese, right? And a lot of our foods are in general low fat and low sugar, with the exception of white rice, of course. But even then, like that was most of the time our only source of sugar and carbs. Everything else was vegetables, a bit of meat, but not a crazy amount of it, or even protein in general. So for me, like I as I grew up, and a lot of my fellow Asian peers would also experience the same thing. For us, if anything, whenever we exercised, we actually gained weight because our diet is very different from Western diets, from what I found. Like even our fast foods, quote unquote, like for Chinese fast food, dim sum would be considered our fast food. Like the baos, the shrimp dumplings, the seafood dumplings, all that stuff. That stuff is relatively low fat unless you're going to a restaurant and they're trying to serve up, with extra oil and all that kind of stuff. But that's a different story. But in general, like we're not eating hamburgers or fries or poutine or whatever for our fast food. So like that's the baseline for us. And our typical food that we eat every day is like, vegetables, rice, and some meat as well. So for me, what I found with the only thing that was lacking was that I wasn't eating enough protein.
Yeah.
So I ramped up my protein consumption to the extent where I was eating like 2 plates of food a day. And I still do. And like 2 big bowls of soup, because we're also huge on soup as well, like clear soups and all that kind of stuff, but like lots of protein on my end. And I had to gain weight in order when I was exercising. So, unlike for what I found a lot of Westerners, when they exercise, they tend to lose weight.
Yeah.
But that's just something, it's not exactly like 100% relevant, I guess, to what we're talking about. But that's what I found, like, like a strange connection that I found. Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. think like the biggest problem for female athletes, especially. So our nutritionist when I was at Carleton was a male nutritionist, which was not a problem. But we actually had a female nutritionist at University of Calgary for the Dinos, and she was a former Olympic speed skater. And she spoke about the science that's being done about female bodies and how it's really hard for um, female athletes to be able to actually be feeding themselves properly, and the vitamins and the minerals, the protein, all of these different things that women need, especially to do with like cycles and things like that, is being missed by a lot of female athletes, even at the highest level. And it's having a major impact on energy levels in student athletes and things like that. So there's a massive prevalence of low iron and iron deficiencies amongst athletes. And all of us at Carleton had to get tested for that before we played so they could make sure we were healthy. And yeah, I ended up having to take iron supplements. I think at least 90% of the team was taking supplements because you just had to. It's really hard to get in your diet, and I think there's just a problem with that aspect for women, just because when you're working out at that level, you're losing so much, you're burning so much that it's almost impossible to like maintain what you need to eat, especially when you don't have someone helping you and you're younger and it's harder and you're not as experienced with cooking and all of those things.
Yeah, and I find that when you mentioned the iron deficiency, one thing I realized with a lot of Western foods, especially with the vegetables, because for us, like spinach is one of the first things we think about when it comes to iron and stuff. But in like for Chinese food, and I would also assume it would be the same thing for Korean and Japanese food, but I'll speak as a Canadian-born Chinese person, I'll speak from the Chinese perspective. We have a lot of vegetables that are just very similar to spinach, but they taste even better, right? So we have our Chinese broccoli, which, by the way, it's, in Chinese, it's called gailan, but, in English, they call it Chinese broccoli or whatever. We have dao miu. I'm sorry I had to speak in Chinese because there actually isn't a lot of English terminology for some of these vegetables. But these are all of our vegetables, like they're so tasty on their own, and they're also healthy at the same time. I would boil or steam just some stalks of gailan, and I wouldn't even have to add any seasoning, not even salt or pepper. Once I steam it or boil it and I take it out and I start eating it, it's already flavorful on its own. And it's a lot easier because when you have vegetables like that, eating healthy is actually fun, at least from the Chinese perspective. But when I realized that, I'm like, I understand why, there's the old adage of, telling kids to eat your vegetables in North America, because when I've eaten Western vegetables like broccoli or cauliflower, they're not as flavorful as a lot of the Asian vegetables, which is why, I mean, if you've seen a lot of Westerners when they try out like very traditional Asian cuisines, like especially the vegetables, they're blown away by how good it actually tastes.
Yeah.
And that helps a lot with even training, because when eating healthy is actually fun and tasty and you look forward to it, it's a whole different mindset, at least from my own personal perspective. It's so much different than when you have, now I have to eat like this plate of brown rice with, this flavorless chicken or, that kind of thing, right? It's just so different.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And it's such an important aspect, even for like students when you're in law school too. I feel like nutrition is so important, that it's like something people are lacking a lot. And when you're busy and at school all the time, all you eat is the, more Western style, unhealthy fast food. So that's something you have to try and take into account with your time and your scheduling, is when you're going to set aside time to cook for yourself and make sure you're like prepped for that, week ahead and those long days. And even as a lawyer, like working as an articling student right now, I find on Sundays, like that's the day I sit down and I try and plan out my meals for the week so that I have something, so that I'm not going out, I'm not spending money, and I'm not doing all these things. And now that I'm older, it's a bit easier. And now that I kind of like know a lot more, I had a lot of experience with nutritionists now from being in sports, that I've been given a lot of information, and now I'm more equipped to use it and to do a better job at fueling myself, and not just for exercise, but fueling myself for a long day in an office using like your brain all day. Yeah.
And I often find that for myself, especially when I was studying for the bar exam, which, even just mentioning the bar exam is just, I found that eating seafood also helps for me, at least for fish. But to be fair, I've done that even since high school and middle school, because, omega-3 and all that kind of stuff, good for your brain and whatever and stuff. But for me, like I tend to eat like at least once a week, I eat seafood.
Yeah.
and that also helps me because I get my protein, but it's also kind of low fat, and at the same time, like the fatty acids are actually beneficial for your brain growth or maintaining your brain health and all that stuff. So there's that as well. And yeah, the right kind of food, like y'all, not only do you need the kind of right kind of fuel for your physical health, but also for your mental health as well.
Hmm.
And that was something that, I mean, it's also very admirable to see, athletes trying to balance that because every single part of their day, even what they eat and what they do, is so dependent on how they perform on the pitch or on the
Yeah.
ice or on the court. So
Hmm.
it's absolutely fascinating, like absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So even after you graduated from Carleton's law program, you, as we all know, you still played U Sports rugby during your law school years with the Dinos. So, balancing your training and your training days and your game days with your time studying in law school, that's a whole different beast in and of itself. How did you do that?
Yeah, this is definitely different. Having the entire like 4 year undergrad program to warm up to this was very helpful. I was very lucky because one of my teammates was actually in law school as well, and we were in all the same classes. And so we were able to collaborate together and create schedules that worked where we would split readings and we would have study sessions when we were on away trips and just really worked together to get through it. And it felt so lucky to have someone who was doing exactly what I was doing, like to a T. Every day looked nearly identical. And so we were able to just lean on each other and get through it together, which was really nice. And then that friend only played for the first year. And then I had 2 more years after that. One was COVID, so that doesn't count. And then in my last year, like I had built that network with my friend, and then I was on my own doing it, but it still was manageable because I had built those schedules from the get-go. We had a great coach in first year who knew what we were doing and was very understanding. He was like, school comes first. I'm aware of that. Rugby is your next one. Like it's really close to school, but he was like, this is important. This is for your life. Like, you guys need to be focused on school. So if you have an event or you have something you need to be at, I will not hold it against you if you're not at practice or things like that. Like we never missed games, but it was very nice to have that flexibility if we needed to leave early, if we needed something like that, or to miss a training session because we had something like the morning training sessions where we're in the gym, we could miss those as well because we had presentations or exams or things like that, which was awesome. So it was just a team of support, having the law school also being really helpful, having the professors be very helpful. We had to miss classes. We had to be away, and all of our professors were super wonderful. They were understanding. The dean even met with us and talked to us about how we were balancing everything. And we just felt like we weren't alone the whole time. And we both had played in our undergrad. So we had a bit of that background of balancing study schedules. And both of us wanted to do well in undergrad to be able to go to law school. So we were very good at setting aside that study time and working together just to be able to manage the immense workload. Just like my tip to anyone in law school, I always say, find a reading buddy who will help you split the readings, and then you can teach them to each other after, because then you learn from a friend and you also get to teach a subject. So if your friend isn't that good at reading, at least you learned 50% of that material very well.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And just being able to repeat that with
Mm-hmm.
your own spoken voice and understanding it. I think there was a study that came out way back, even when I was in high school, that the best way to learn it is to teach it,
Yeah.
because that means you genuinely understand it, the
Yeah.
material, like better than even writing notes. Like, don't get me wrong, writing notes is very important as well. But, teaching it to somebody or being able to understand it to that level is such an important thing to help you do well, really in anything, but especially in law school.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, like I probably said this many times, but like that discipline that you've had from your undergrad years all the way into your law school years. Like, I got to be honest, you were better prepared for law school than I was. Because, like, I mean, I was never an athlete, but I'm a classical pianist. And while I do, I mean, to give some semblance, I practice, like, I used to practice 5 to 8 hours a day, 7 days a week to keep up my technique and to understand the piece and to synthesize what the composers are talking about, whether it's the Baroque, classical, romantic era. Romantic with a capital R, it's the different meaning, and the 20th century repertoire. But even then, it's very much like just on my own. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's just keeping the mental aspect, but I'm not like necessarily having the physical aspect, like eating healthy, although it does help, but it's not as important as playing rugby, where every single calorie that you consume influences the number of reps you perform in the gym, or how fast you run on the pitch, or how many tries you score on the pitch, right?
Yeah.
So it's for me, like I found that I was lacking a little bit in that, and whereas you had that, so you were better off than I was preparing for law school, and your ability to associate with a team of people. Not to say I couldn't do it, but like for me, it was very different because you already grew up with that. I didn't. I was very much self-study and all that kind of stuff. So that's a massive advantage that I think you and a lot of student athletes who went into law school or any kind of professional school or master or graduate program had over non-athletes.
Totally. And I think that's the benefit of it doesn't have to just come from sports. It's the community, I think, is the biggest thing. And that's why so many law schools are so good at having all of those clubs and all of those things you can join, because you just need to find your people. You need to find your thing, your friends, the people who are going to, be like you and have the same experiences as you. And having someone who did absolutely everything I did, that was the greatest thing ever for me, just to know someone else was suffering the way I was suffering, kind of like just having people who are your peers and your friends who are going through all of these hardships at the same time as you and helping you get through. It's really important. And having sports, of course, like that helps break up the day into healthy physical activity. And I really appreciated that.
And what do you miss about that time now that you've finished playing rugby? Or unless you choose to go back into the professional rugby or anything. Hey, we got a nice little visitor here.
Sorry, I'm a visitor.
Yeah, no worries. A nice little guest appearance for our video viewers. I encourage our for those of you listening, Catrina's puppy just appeared on camera, so tune into our YouTube video if you see that little bit of a extra bit. But what do you miss the most from your time playing rugby?
Well, I'm still playing, but not nearly as competitive. I mean, it's competitive, but it's not as high commitment, which is nice. I'd say the biggest thing I miss is the friendships you build. It is like a whole nother world to be with people almost 24/7. Like it is this crazy community you build, and the bonds you create during that time, the stories you hear from your teammates, just the way you learn to support others and empathize with others. It's so important. And going into the legal field, I feel like being able to speak with different kinds of people, like, yes, we all had a common goal of playing rugby, but everyone was in a different program. Everyone had a different background. Everyone came from somewhere else. Everyone had a different story, which was so cool to get to know these people on such a deep level because you were constantly with them. So that is the biggest thing I miss, is getting to be in that atmosphere where you just get to know so many different kinds of people and you all love and respect each other and you're just a family.
That's really, really good. And I think especially, and as a brand new lawyer right now, having just been called to the bar, I can tell you one thing, that it's the same thing in legal practice.
Mm-hmm.
You'll find a lot of teamwork as you're working. Like a lot of these files, especially early on in your practice, you can't do it on your own. A lot of people think of law as this very individual, very isolated kind of practice, and maybe because they don't know anything about the legal profession. That happens when you're a sole practitioner. Maybe I don't want to be 100% because I don't know anything about sole practices. But that's not the case if you're working in a firm. Yeah. And especially if you're working in a mid-sized or larger firm. That's just not the reality. Mm-hmm. So, and once you like you mentioned, you got to find your group of people. And this would happen also in the legal practice as well. Yeah. Like once you find your group, and you tend to often to be able to find it, it clicks. Mm-hmm. And yeah, everyone's gone to law school from different backgrounds and has their own different pathways to get to law school and to become a lawyer or whatever profession that they choose to do after law school. But yeah, it's that support, it's that teamwork that really, really helps you get through the day, and it also helps with your health as well.
Yeah,
like sometimes like sometimes you could feel awfully nervous, especially when you're starting out. I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like I'm the only person. I feel like I feel so kind of inadequate. But
Yeah.
don't. Everyone has to make that first jump, right? Everyone
Yeah.
has those first few years. It's just that. It's just the nature of how the profession works.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely.
So now that you're articling at this time, to to what extent does the rugby mindset influence the law mindset, and to what extent does the law mindset affect the rugby mindset?
Well, it's actually funny you asked that question. We had a practice like last week, and the coach was trying to introduce this thing, and I was like, I don't think that's legal. And I was like going through like the rugby laws in my head and like having this conversation with my coach, and she's like, okay, law school, like we don't need to talk about this anymore. It's fine. And I was like, okay. But it was just really funny because it definitely makes me look at the sport in a different way. I look at the sport, like I look at the rules more and I try and see how you can strategize with the rules and like where you can play within the rules and things like that. Um, and so it's definitely, I've seen it in rugby for sure. And I'm like a justice warrior when I'm on the field, which is bad. I hate when there's unjust calls. And so I'm always getting frustrated in my mind. Uh, in the legal field, I'd say that the biggest thing it's taught me is like things are challenging, but there's always a way through it. Like from learning the sport is incredibly challenging, but it just requires you to persevere and just like be determined and not give up and always try like everything you can and not be afraid to make mistakes, not be afraid to, do the wrong thing once in a while. You just make sure you're open to being coachable and being able to hear that feedback and implement it and not make the same mistakes going forward.
Yeah, and yeah, and this is really something that we all go through, well, each and every day, honestly, whatever we do. So,
Yeah.
so true, absolutely true. Yeah, I mean, nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
Nobody's perfect. It's impossible to do everything perfectly, and mistakes happen, and hopefully those mistakes aren't too bad, but mistakes do happen, and the important thing is you learn from that mistake and you well improve from that.
No, exactly.
Yeah. And looking at rugby as a whole, like aside from you mentioned how a lot of people their first impressions of rugby are, they're terrified of the sport and stuff. Aside from that first impression, or we can call it a misconception, what are some of the greatest misconceptions that people generally have about the sport of rugby?
I think that injuries are super common. Like I said earlier, injuries are just as frequent in any other sport. And like concussions, things like that, you're taught specifically how to tackle without hurting yourself, hurting others. And we did talk about like the practicing. So that's a big one people have. I think also that like it's kind of chaotic, bizarre sport. Like people just think that there's no order, that it's chaos. And beautiful thing about rugby is that it looks like chaos, but when you are playing it or when you see it executed at the level that it's like the highest level, it is so beautiful and it is so like it is organized chaos at all times. And there's always some kind of structure going on. There's always something going on. And people just, if you don't know the sport, it's really hard to see that. And so that's like one I always try and tell people it's actually like this wonderful sport that has all these rules and everyone at the end of the day loves each other on the field. Like you go to battle and then at the end of the game, you have a beer with the people you were just smashing and the people who just smashed you. So I'd say those are like the big ones for me.
And since the time that you've played, from the moment that you started playing and up until today, has the general perception of rugby improved? Has that have more and more people, especially in Canada, have people seen rugby, closer to the way how you described it, or has it gone the other way? Or has it stayed the same? Like how has the perception changed?
I think with the introduction of sevens into the Olympics and with the like, especially in Vancouver, they have Vancouver Sevens now, and that's such a party. People love going to it. More people who weren't interested in the sport are becoming interested in the sport. I prefer 15s rugby to sevens rugby, But I love that people are seeing sevens rugby. It's a bit more of a digestible format of rugby as well. It's quicker. It's kind of bang, 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 lots of action, very fun, very easy to watch. So I think the conceptions have completely shifted where people see like how good the women's team is doing and how amazing the sport actually is and how it isn't chaotic. It is actually this beautifully structured madness on the field. And so I love that it's becoming more mainstream and that it's becoming more popular. I want to keep seeing that trend go upwards and seeing the engagement, especially with female athletes joining rugby and parents not being afraid of thinking their kids are going to get hurt by playing because it isn't this dangerous sport that people make it out to be.
Yeah, and that's good to hear. That's good to hear that the perception is changing very much across the country. It's always good to see that with sports, especially since, as you know, rugby hasn't culturally been a Canadian sport.
Yeah,
it's always been hockey and lacrosse.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's very, very encouraging to see that, and honestly, to see how the teams have grown, even in university sport, whether if it's Carleton or Calgary or really any other university. I mean, just seeing that growth is something that is quite so encouraging. And yeah, I mean, going back to a little bit earlier, you were mentioning that you were following, how Carleton was facing up against the teams. Now they're beating Ottawa, I think, with like 30 or 40 points now, which is like 8 years ago or 7 years ago. I'm like, whoa, that is something that I wouldn't have expected. Or
yeah, totally. Yeah, no, it's crazy. It's really awesome to watch and just to see like other teams improve and all these programs that were a lot smaller do a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, now you're an articling student. You've graduated law school, you've written the bar, and you've done all these things. You're almost a lawyer, or a lawyer to being called to the bar. What are your future plans and goals?
Yeah, that's a good one. That was something I was telling my family. It's like I need to come up with new goals. My goals was to get here, and now I'm here. So for me, it's to really establish a good life with work and with continuing to play rugby and to building, relationships outside of work and just having this holistic life that does not just involve only one thing, which is something that being a student athlete has taught me. You always need to have more than one thing going on. You have to have more to your life and more to yourself just for your own mental health and well-being. You have to have all these other things and you have to have some kind of network. And work network is great. Like I'm building my work network, but I'm also building, my rugby network and I'm building my community outside of those things as well so that I just have a bunch of different things to kind of hold me up so that if, one starts feeling crummy, at least I have these other two things that are going good and it just helps balance it. And there's going to be, peaks and valleys and all of them being ups and downs. And it's just nice to have more than one thing going on. So my goal is to, excel in my career, but also excel in maintaining a personal life.
Yeah, networking. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's one of the number one fears of many law students. Many. I mean, the next one is public speaking, but networking it's a scary thing, especially when you have to make the cold call or, I mean, it's easier when you're with friends because they know you, but when you're cold calling or when you're emailing someone that you would not normally do so, it is very, very daunting for a lot of people, which is also why, I mean, the law school show exists because it's also a networking ability for a lot of podcast hosts and producers and everybody else as well, because you get to peer into a specific area like what we're doing right now. You get to peer into what makes the stories of each and every lawyer, law student, or legal professional and how they got to where they did, right? And we at this point we're over 200 episodes in, and out of all of the stories, like each and every story is so unique, like very, very unique. Everybody went to law school for very different reasons. Some of them may have been similar, but there's always variation. And what they've been able to do with a law degree is so diverse. It's not just lawyers. I mean, we've got former politicians, we've got a lot of people working in human rights organizations, NGOs, so on and so forth, the tech sector as well. So especially in Canada, which generally has a relatively small legal world, it's so important to network because you never know where you end up.
Yeah, definitely. It's a tough skill, but it is something that develops throughout. It's not something I was strong at first, but it's something like you just have to, work your way through, and eventually it's just something you accept and learn to do. And I still cringe a little bit, but you get through it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as we begin to close the episode, and once again, our special guest is on the, what's the name of the puppy, by the way?
This is Sage. She wants attention.
Aw. So as we begin to close the episode, what is your advice to new law students and future law students on surviving the law school experience? And in particular, for those in our audience who are about to enter law school, who are also student athletes or former student athletes, what's your advice to them?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say that you want to be just kind of open-minded when you go in, be ready to tackle anything, and try not to be afraid that you're going to mess up or that you're going to do the wrong thing. Just try and go into it with an open mind and open heart, and really focus on the things that are important to you, the things you want to set aside time for, and just like learning to build a schedule. I would say just go in open-minded, be ready to make friends, say yes to everything, and just focus on that community and building healthy habits, healthy community around you, and not being too focused on just school. Have something outside of it, whether it's joining the law school hockey team or joining an intramural team, doing boxing on the outside, or like painting, poetry, writing, anything. Honestly, any extracurricular is so good. And also like throwing in some volunteer work there too, if you can, because it really helps you feel good at your heart. I did food bank volunteering while I was in law school, and it was such a fun little break to go just do something else. And I felt like I was helping people, and it just made me feel whole. And that's what I needed through school. So finding what makes you whole and finding your people.
Wise words to end this episode on, And yeah, I mean, Catrina, thank you so much for appearing on the show. It's been great to catch up with you too. It's been, I mean, like for us personally, it's been like how many years? Like 4 years?
4 years, yeah.
4 years since we've seen face to face, and even then it's virtual. But
yeah,
man, like time really does fly. But yeah, I mean, it was great to have you on the show. I think our audience, especially those who came from a sports background, will definitely relate to a lot with what you said. And I think, yeah, it's been so much fun to have you on the show. Thanks again for spending a bit of time out of your very busy articling experience to come on to the show.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really lovely to catch up as well, and just lovely to chat about it. It's always fun to talk about your experiences, and hopefully I can help someone who needs some help or encouragement.
Thanks again, and thank you to our audience for tuning in to this episode of the Law School Show. And be sure to tune in next time as we have yet another great guest coming on to the show. And as we continue to give you great content, over 200 episodes in, and we're still going strong. Thank you so much for all the support to everybody listening or watching this episode, and for all the other past episodes as well. So once again, thank you so much. Signing off for now, this is Amos Vang. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, click the like button. If you want to see more, subscribe and click the bell icon so you'll be notified whenever we upload. You can also visit us on our website, thelawschoolshow.com, and you can follow us on our social media. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.